Today we're going to be talking about augmented and diminished triads. We'll begin with augmented triad. So you can think of an augmented triad as a major triad with a raised fifth scale degree. From the root to the fifth of your triad would be an augmented fifth, which is a half step higher than the fifth scale degree of the major scale. So a half step higher. And from the root to the third is still a major third, which is just the normal third scale degree of your major scale. Remember that when we're raising the fifth, we need to keep the letter name the same and just change the accidental. So we'll see what I'm talking about in a minute here. We're going to begin with the D major augmented triad. So here's the D major scale. We're looking at the first scale degree, the third scale degree, and the fifth scale degree. So, according to our definition of augmented triad up here, we're keeping the root and the third the same as they are in the scale. So we're keeping D natural as D natural, we're keeping F sharp as F sharp, and our fifth scale degree is going to be raised one half step. So a half step higher than A is A sharp. So there we have D as the root, F sharp as the third, and A sharp as the fifth. That is our D augmented triad. Our second example, we'll use C major, no sharps, no flats. Again, we're looking at the root, that is C, our third, and our fifth. So the root and the third will remain the same as they are here in the scale. C natural, E natural, and our fifth needs to be raised a half step. So it will be, it goes from G natural to G sharp. So C, E, G sharp, and that is exactly what we have here in our C augmented triad. The last example, we're going to do a tricky one, that is C sharp major, where everything is already sharp to begin with. The root and the third remain exactly the same, and the fifth is going to be raised a half step. So what is a half step higher than a G sharp without changing the letter name? That is a G double sharp. So we will spell it C sharp, E sharp, and G double sharp. There it is. If you were to play that chord on the piano, this C sharp augmented chord, it would be these three keys that you would press down. C sharp is there, this black key. E sharp is the same thing as F, and G double sharp is the same thing as A. However, we cannot call the middle note F, and we cannot call the top note A, because it has to be spelled so that they're stacked in thirds, and so that you have every other letter of the musical alphabet. So if your bottom note is C sharp, you have to call the middle note some kind of E, and you have to call the top note some kind of G. Otherwise, you don't have a triad by definition. We're going to move on to diminished triad. So in the same way that an augmented triad was like a major triad on steroids, our diminished triad is like a minor triad, but extra sad. So the minor triad already had a lowered third, and now we're also going to lower the fifth. So a lowered third and a lowered fifth make a diminished triad. So from the root to the fifth is a diminished fifth. That's a half step lower than the normal fifth of your scale. And then the third is a minor third. And the minor third is a half step lower than the normal third scale degree of your major scale. Remember that we have to keep the letter names the same. We're only going to be changing the accidental to lower our notes by a half step. So first example, back to D major. To get a diminished triad from this, we need to lower the third by a half step, and we need to lower the fifth by a half step. Half step lower than a sharp is a natural, so we need F natural. And a half step lower than a natural is a flat, so we need A flat. That makes D, F natural, A flat, which is what we have here. And of course I said F natural, and this is an F natural even though we don't have the natural sign, because there's no key signature, so everything is automatically assumed to be natural to begin with. So I just wrote D, F, A flat. That is our D diminished triad. Second example is C major. We're going to be making a diminished triad, so we need the root, that is C. We need the third lowered by a half step, which will be E flat. And we need the fifth lowered by a half step, which is G flat. So C, E flat, G flat. There they are. C diminished triad. Our last example, we'll choose a tricky one. C flat major, where everything is already flatted to begin with. We need the root, that is C flat. We need the third lowered a half step. A half step lower than a flat is a double flat, so we need E double flat. We also need to lower the fifth scale degree by a half step. And again, a half step lower than a flat is a double flat, so we need G double flat. C flat, E double flat, G double flat make a diminished triad. If you were to play this diminished triad on the piano, these are the keys you'd be pressing down on. C flat happens to be the same key as B. E double flat is the same key as D, and G double flat is the same key as F. But for the same reasons I explained when we were talking about the C sharp augmented chord, you cannot change the letter names that they are spelled with. If you're calling the bottom note C flat, you have to call the middle note some kind of E, and you have to call the top note some kind of G. So it's essential that you say E double flat instead of D, and it's essential that you say G double flat instead of F, because if we spelled it C flat, D, F, we would not have a triad because we would not have them stacked in thirds, and the letter names would not be one apart from one another. So that is augmented and diminished triads.